Today, of course, we are going to talk about something that probably nobody wants to talk about anymore in the media here or anywhere, which is the issue of what's going on in Egypt and the relationship between what's going on in Egypt and what's going on here in the United States. To get to this, I think we need maybe to talk a little bit about a few things, just to clarify things about this story, including like this current civilization that we seem to have, concepts that we use on our daily basis, like the 12 hours system, like the 7 days, like the musical scale that Pythagoras had learned from Egypt. So the whole world is using the same scale until now based on what Pythagoras had learned in Egypt and had taught. And so on and so forth. So many of these elements do come from Egypt, according to historians. But this is not the only thing when we talk about Egypt, just to talk about the past. There is, in the recent past, also things to talk about. For instance, Egypt actually had a kind of revolution in the 19th century, which brought a democratic government and a parliament, that the king at that time had to conspire with the British to invade Egypt so that they get rid of the free democratic government. That government was exiled to Sri Lanka in 1882 with the British invasion, and unfortunately they never made it back to Egypt because Egypt was occupied by the British until they died. So it's a fate that I fear probably could be mine as well, that I will not see my country again with what's going on. So just to see this background, so there was this democracy attempt that lasted for a little while in the 19th century. As a matter of fact, even there was a revolution at the beginning of the 19th century that brought Muhammad Ali in the first place to power in 1805. But he was not democratic. He turned against those who chose him and imprisoned them and so on. But he made a big empire in 1805. So in the 20th century, there was a revolution of 1919, which started in March 9th, 1919, and ended in February 28th, 1922. And according to Gandhi, he was in South Africa at the time, as probably we all know, and he was following the news of this revolution, and this taught him about nonviolence. He learned the tactics of nonviolence and that they work from this revolution. So it's a long struggle for freedom. It's not as some people in the West prefer to think, that people in the Middle East are not into democracy, are not into freedom, are enemies to human rights. This is not true. It's those who try to make these things true is the problem through their illicit interventions. So let's move ahead now to more recent history. We have been under the rule of one dictator, that is Hosni Mubarak, for 3 decades, 30 years. So people are born, they go to school, they finish school, they get married, they have children, and it's the same guy. Did we like it? Of course not. So what did we do? We have been trying to organize against Hosni Mubarak for about 10 years before the revolution. There are several things that, of course, are included in details in the book so that we can see how these movements start, what threatens them, how they break, what happens to them, why they fail, and how we can actually figure out what can work. There has been a lot of trial and error in the learning process, because how else do we know? We have started with more of the leftist kind of organizing, ideology. We tried to work with this, and it wasn't as successful as we hoped. We tried internet, and we tried to organize many events using internet, and that failed too. Who are we? Okay, starting from the US invasion to Iraq in 2003, there was this spontaneous reaction in the country. Like there was absolutely no organizing. But March 20th, when the invasion started in 2003, I just went to Tahrir and I found hundreds of thousands of people who did the same thing without any organizing. We just went to Tahrir. We occupied Tahrir back then in protest against the invasion. By midnight, the remaining protesters in the square were attacked, brutally, of course, beaten up and arrested, whoever that the police can catch. The next day, we continued. We made a huge march of hundreds of thousands of people that went through the streets of Cairo. We reoccupied Tahrir. And again, we were facing even more brutal, enormous forces. And also in that day, I saw scenes that I have never seen before in my life until that time, when the cops, a bunch of them, maybe between 7 and 10 or something, and they snatched a protester. They beat them up really, really hard with all these metal objects they have, like pipes and chains. So, of course, the person is completely, bleeding all over and unconscious. And then they take the arms, they tear the clothes to wrap the arms from behind, and then put them in piles. There were piles of bleeding bodies in which you can never tell who's alive and who's dead. Looking at this, scenes like that, there were other things, of course, made us, as activists, realize that our focus cannot be anything else but creating change in Egypt, because no matter who or how strong is an invader, they are never worse than those local occupations by tyrannies, kleptocracies, and people of that sort. So this led us to initiate, to start a movement that was against that regime, known as Kifaya, or Enough. The Egyptian Movement for Change is actually the original name that was a little big, but Kifaya became more catchy. And I was honored to be one of the leaders of this umbrella movement. A few months later, we actually started also the first youth movement against Hosni Mubarak, in which I was honored to lead for most of its time, during those two years of its time. And we did pretty well at the beginning. In 2005, we were able to make simultaneous large protests in like 24 cities at one time, for instance. We were able to do like some good stuff. But by 2006, things went very rough, and that was it. What was the difference? The difference was, believe it or not, George W. Bush and his administration and his justification to the Iraq invasion. Because first, it was weapons of mass destruction, but then there was none. So that shifted into, okay, he was a dictator, and we are trying to promote democracy. This gave us a tiny cover within the brutalities that were going on in 2005. But things were much harsher in 2006, because this led to a mutiny within the judiciary. The judges made a sit-in their union, demanding that elections would actually be free and that they can exercise their constitutional right in supervising the elections to make it free. And we organized a sit-in parallel to this outside in the street, and I was one of the first people to get attacked and arrested. And yeah, I had like a long hunger strike. I was held in unknown location where I have been, like, at the beginning, of course, there was torture, but not continuously. It was for 3 days and things like that. It was tough, and finally I got out of the hunger strike after 17 days after they cheated me into believing that I will be allowed to have contact with a lawyer or with the rest of the world. So I was instead sent to the general population of a big prison, in which I was treated with a lot of respect, surprisingly. So I was welcomed in the deputy warden room where I was sitting on a chair. That is a luxury in prison. And I didn't have to change my clothes where they do that in other places that are very dirty, and like to be held in a cell with, you know, like people would do whatever they have to do because there are no toilet facilities in them, things like that. So yeah, finally they took me. I was very weak because I was coming out of this hunger strike, so I was hardly able to walk. They were helping me. And they told me that I could choose any cell I want. So they took me to a couple of cells, and they were, as usual, overcrowded. The system is, this is what you get. Of course, you don't get what this is. This is what we call a palm and a fist. What is a palm and a fist? This is your space on the floor. Because there are no beds, that's luxury, it doesn't exist. The dirty floor, overly infested with bugs. And this is how you sleep. This is your space inside a cell, overcrowded, packed. So I asked if there were other cells where there are other political activists, at least. So they took me to a couple of those, and I chose one. And yeah, anyway, got out of this, tried to make a different plan for a real change based on the lessons that we have learned from this previous attempt. Because the original organization, the youth movement that we had at that time, Youth for Change, it was infiltrated while I was in prison and sabotaged. So we had nothing. Came up with a plan about a different structure. So how about if we do this completely with levels of secrecy, in which there is part that is above ground, the rest has to be hidden underground, based on group leadership with spread out kind of horizontal structure, 3 levels, semi-independent, small cells. The proposition was to have 50 of semi-independent small cells of between 12 and 20 each in Greater Cairo, and 15 in every other governorate or state, to prepare for a revolution in 2011. These discussions, these plans that I have formulated in 2008 have been put in reports from the US Embassy in Cairo to the State Department. And this was leaked, of course, by Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange in WikiLeaks. So it's out there. It shows the plans that I had about this revolution in 2011. Things didn't go in the manner that I have proposed. The idea was to create a new movement with this structure. But to create it, how? If we can't access people, if I can't find ways to, find some young people that I could talk to and convince them because of the security grip. It was complicated for a moment to try to figure this out, but there was something that was brewing, which was a call for a general strike in Egypt, and it was successful in 2008. And so Facebook was kind of new thing for us. So there was a group on Facebook of people who are very much supportive and interested in this. So I sought the administrator of this group, who was a former member of Youth for Change, my previous organization. And we agreed that, okay, those young people who are members of this Facebook group that turned into a page later, they don't know us. They don't know us political activists. They know you probably as an administrator. So why don't we try to grab a few of those persons that maybe have been contacting the page and start a new nucleus with them that would lead us into this new structure. And you can be the public face of this. So we started doing that. We called it April 6, which was the day of the successful general strike that happened a few months before. And it became April 6 Youth Movement. But unfortunately, petty differences and problems made this proposed structure very difficult, because this person liked to be in power, liked to be in the focus of, the lights and everything. And he didn't want to change things right. He didn't want to make the structure that we had from the beginning, that we agreed upon. He wanted to make it a hierarchy. But of course, it was not direct like this. He would put all these obstacles and excuses and postponing of things and I don't know what, wasting time so that it continues within this atmosphere. So we arrived to the proposed date for starting, according to my original plans, to provoke areas into revolution, because my idea was to spend the time until November 2010 building up these little groups or small cells of activists in areas so that they start inciting neighborhoods, starting from the parliamentary election in November 2010 that I proposed, that I predicted will be horrible, will be really rigged, which is exactly what happened. And that this will be a great excuse to start turning people up and getting them organized. But we had no organization. April 6 was not all these big numbers that I proposed that we could do. It was only about, I don't know, maybe a little over 24 activists. Most of them are in disagreement because they are pulled in two different camps. One camp that wanted democracy, one camp that was around Ahmed Meher, the guy that I mentioned. And it was more a media thing than an actual on-the-ground movement. So that didn't seem to be working. It seemed like we are getting into 2011 with nothing. There is no way that we can create that revolution. So it was very frustrating. But then, there were other elements, of course, that were going on. For instance, a former officer in the intelligence came out in December that year with information that is incredible. Like, he put his name, his picture, his rank out online, which is very serious. Like, you cannot do this if you are an intelligence officer. Imagine a CIA operative that would do this and reveals secret information. So this guy revealed that the regime actually organizes terrorist attacks and will organize a terrorist attack by the end of the year in order to round up activists and prepare 2011 for succession of Gamal Mubarak in the place of his father, Hosni Mubarak. So the son would take the throne from his dad, like in Syria, was the Syrian dictator who took it from his murderous father. Okay. Now this is official. We have always suspected this, because always before a renewal of emergency laws, we get terrorist attacks. It's a very strange timing. But anyway, by New Year's Eve, between 2010, 2011, there was a mass in a church in Alexandria called the Two Saints Church, and there was a bombing there that killed 24 people. on that special day. Bombings were not really that known in Egypt that much. I mean, we will have a couple of terrorist attacks every year for the renewal of emergency laws and rounding up of activists, but it's not like an everyday thing. And definitely not with usually this amount of casualties, so it was big. We as activists figured out, okay, we know this was done by the regime, but most of the people don't, and we have to make a stand. So we organized protests in my neighborhood. It's called Shobra in Cairo. And the reason is 1/3 of the population of this neighborhood, which is huge, is actually Coptic Christians. The neighborhood is about 6-7 million people, makes it 1/3 of Cairo. And about 1/3 of those are actually Coptic Christians, which makes it the most populated Christian part probably in the Middle East, this spot. Christians in Egypt and Muslims are the same looks. You can never differentiate between a Muslim and a Christian based on their facial features or the color of their skin or anything like that, maybe based on what they are wearing. That's all. If they are wearing, like a woman is wearing a veil or someone is wearing a cross or something like that. It's completely integrated. Like there are no Christian areas. When I say Shubra has 1/3 of the population, they're Christian, it's completely mixed. It's not like there is a Christian quarter in Shubra. Why? Because there is no real discrimination and problem between Muslims and non-Muslims in most Muslim countries, because Muslims are actually ordered to respect all other religions and to protect them, contrary to what you hear on the media here. And this is why in a country like Egypt that has 90 million people, 10 million of those are Coptic Christians. And when Islam came to Egypt 1400 years ago, most of the population in Egypt was Coptic Christian. In Spain, when the Reconquista happened in 1492, there were lots of Muslims and Jews in Spain, and it took the Inquisition a couple of hundred years until the 17th century to burn or kill or force conversion to all, or enslave many actually that were used as ore people going to South America, and the boats going to South America, they were enslaved. That's why in South American Spanish there is a lot more Arabic words. In Spanish there is 5,000 Arabic words, and there is more in South American Spanish. Por eso yo hablo español. Es como un dialecto mezclado árabe. So just with this background, we organized those protests in Shubra, and it was a wonderful thing because both Muslims and Christians were marching together hand in hand and making protests against the regime, against the Minister of the Interior that organized this attack, and not believing the official story of the government. This continued for a few days, and then the Coptic Patriarch, or Pope, as we also called them there, he gave orders not to do any more protests for the Christians. So when the Muslims tried to continue with the protests, they realized it's only them. There are no Christians participating in protesting an attack over a church. So that ended. But Tunisia was already brewing. Tunisia, there were lots of protests there. It started as economical uprising, but then with the new year coming in January, it was turning political. And it was directly against Zain al-Abidin bin Ali, the dictator in Tunisia. And then it actually succeeded. They did bring down Zain al-Abidin bin Ali in a surprise for the Egyptians. Why? Because we always assumed that we had better preparation, better organization. We've been, like Tunisia was trying to copy the Egyptian Kifaya that I mentioned earlier, that was in 2005. and so on. So there was this little bit of jealousy that we wanted to use to get people to wake up. They did it in Tunisia. Why can't you? We called for a meeting. No, sorry. A policeman, a former policeman, whose name is Omar Afifi, a colonel, who left Egypt. He escaped from Egypt. He lives now in Alexandria, Virginia. He left Egypt because he had written a book that tells people what to do when they face a policeman to have their best possible rights. And this drove the police in Egypt crazy. So they confiscated all the copies and they tried to arrest him, but he had a tip beforehand, so he managed to get out of the country. He made a Facebook call for a revolution on January 25th. That was on January 14th, 2011. And I thought, what the hell Omar Afifi had done? You can't make a revolution in 10 days, 11 days. This is crazy. Thank God not that many people listen to what he says. Same day, another Facebook page took this call and did the same thing. That other page is called We Are All Khalid Said. Khalid Said was the name of a young middle-class person that was beaten to death in the street by cops because he managed to get through Bluetooth a video that shows those cops sharing the drug bust that they got and money and things like that. Very corrupt. So they killed him in the street in front of dozens of people. And then they tried to make it as if he died because he was a drug addict and he swallowed some drugs that choked him. But of course, his skull was smashed. I saw a marble step on stairs that was broken by his skull. So you can imagine the violence. I've seen the pictures. They're terrible of his body. So this brought up a lot of attention, of course, against police brutality, and many people joined this Facebook page, We Are All Khalid Said. So, okay, nice. 100,000 people, members of this Facebook page, are seeing this thing now. All right, we need to meet. So we activists, we had a meeting in a room that is not much bigger than this, I think a little smaller. And we wanted to figure out what are we going to do next? And it was difficult because we are not that many. We're very small in number. And some people are talking about a revolution. And they wanted just to make a protest on the anniversary of the police like we did the year before. So I disagreed and I tried to convince them that we could at least try to make 3 different protests so that we will have a bit of a better chance of success. Because if it's only one protest and gets defeated immediately, then that's it. It's totally lost. There will be no more hope in the people for doing anything else. That was difficult to have a consensus on because of the small number we had. So finally, we agreed that a number of volunteers would start the protest probably half an hour before the official time. So if they get arrested, then we can try to shift it to a nearby place. We will have a chance. And I left going home with heavy shoulders, feeling like nothing is working as it should be. Everything is not going as I hoped. The next day, I had this friend calling, so we went out together, I got this idea. Let's talk to the people, ask them questions, see how we can create the change. What is the missing link? So this friend of mine is a reporter. I also had a reporter ID card, and that I have been using to get information and see what's going on in different levels and all that. And we just go around asking people, hi, I'm Ahmed, and we are reporters. Just need to ask you a few questions for a story. You don't even have to give me your name. And I start the questions. Have you heard of the protests on January 25th? No. What protests? No, 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 I don't want to hear about that. Things like that. Nobody knows. Oh, okay. The usual, nobody knows if it's on the internet because people don't have access to internet, yeah. Well, these protests are about us taking back our country. You know, with the regime of Hosni Mubarak, many people say that Egypt, that started as number 40 according to the Human Development Report of the United Nations, had descended now into being the 118th country under his rule. And you could see the kleptocracy of the regime and how everyone is so much suffering. So what do you think of Hosni Mubarak? I had, of course, two types of answers, the positive and the negative. So 1/3 was supportive to Hosni Mubarak. Maybe like the Trump supporters. So they would say things like, oh, he is the only, he's wise. All the leaders of the world seek his wisdom. He is the shield that protects us Egyptians from the evils of the Americans and the Israelis. He is, I don't know, like all the myth and fables that the Egyptian media is putting into the heads of the people. And there is a lot more brainwash over there than here, believe it or not. Because at least it's not private, it's all government, the media. Okay. These guys, when I was thinking at the end, I realized they were usually the poorest of the whole bunch. So maybe I was trying to think, maybe they're doing this either because they are totally brainwashed, because they don't have any other access for information, or because they are unsafe to say their mind. They feel that they are poor, so that they are not sure that they have to say the truth. The 2/3 that went against Hosni Mubarak were great. So, yeah, it's that. They will always say things that happen to them, like things that they have seen, things that are obscene about what the government is doing. Awesome. Okay, well, actually, I am one of the organizers of this protest. Would you come with us and claim our country back? And the answer was, no way. Sorry, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Please, let's, I don't want any trouble, etc. Why? And then I had 3 different categories of answers. One, of course, was about fear. Why? I don't want to get shot. I don't want to get tortured. I don't want to get raped. I don't want to disappear in oblivion. You know. Another category of answers was about, there is no way. That regime has 2 million soldiers. Who can stand against this? It's actually correct. The regime of Hosni Mubarak had over 1.5 million in the police and about a little over 400,000 in the military. That's a lot in a country of 90 million people. So who can stand against this? And there was another category of answers that were about the economical facts. I'm the only person that feeds my family. If I don't show up at my work for a day, I lose my job. Who's going to feed my family? Will you feed my family? No. Okay, that was all very frustrating. So one last question, and that was a key question into the whole thing. So would you ever do it? If you will do it, what would make you do it? What would get you down there with us in the street and getting your rights? And then, when everybody else goes out there first, I will join them. When I see with my own eyes the streets are full of people, I'm not going to stay at home. If this is the real thing and the real day and the masses are out there, I'll be on the front line. Nothing will stop me. So I had all these different answers that seemed to be kind of promising, but what can you do about this? The only way to get people out to the street is to get people out to the street. So it's a chicken or egg thing. What could be the solution to this? Then it seemed to me, well, how would people know that people are out in the street if they get the impression that they are? Why don't we make it so? Why don't we make the impression that people everywhere are out everywhere? How do we do this? Let's go back into my old plans. Can we salvage any of my old plans about starting, about these small groups of activists in various neighborhoods that would incite the neighborhood so that on the particular day of the revolution, previously in my original plan, the day for the revolution in 2011, where I was proposing either April or July for particular reasons in the country. So of course this was a whole different date to try to work for January, but anyway. So fine. There seems to be a possibility because we don't have to get volunteers with experience. All we want is volunteers that I could at least give them the basic things of what they need to do. And we try, because there is no other time. We had some people that were making a big campaign after the return of Dr. Mohammed al-Baradei, who won the Nobel Peace Award. He was the head of the International Nuclear Watchdog and all that, and he was very pro-democracy and very respected internationally. So when he returned to Egypt, there was something called the Declaration for Change, where people would sign this declaration that demands democracy, end of Mubarak rule, etc. We had hundreds of thousands of these signatures. So through some friends and some colleagues, we started getting some of these forms of particular areas, contacting people in that area, getting them, and arranging meetings for me with one group after another. I became like a tape recorder being on play. So I am giving them the general idea to give them enthusiasm. I'm giving them the overview of the plans and that they are not alone. There are groups all over, and this has to happen simultaneously everywhere in every city. And how they are supposed to prepare each neighborhood. How do they distribute flyers without being caught? They would have to follow certain formations. There are time limits. There are all these, things that one pays attention to. How would you write graffiti on the wall without being caught? And we are talking about very repressive country with 2 million soldiers. So it's like you have to be really smart or you get caught very easily. What rumors should they start spreading around that would help us for that day, etc. Then on the day itself, how should they do it? And here we get into the solution of the little dilemma that I told you earlier. You remember the chicken or the egg? If we have a small number of people, what do we do? Previously, we thought, okay, we need to get lots of people, so when we are making a protest, let's make it in a big area so we can be seen and more people can join us. And that didn't work because each time we do this, we're surrounded by cops. We are a small number. Nobody else sees us. They only see a bunch of cops, several rows, thick, shoulder to shoulder, shields, everything. And who would come and join us with this? Nobody ever does. Let's make it differently. So now they are preparing these neighborhoods. How about if they start in the small alleys? So a small number of people would sound very loud and visible in a small alley that doesn't take more than a small number of people anyway. And this is where they should start. So they start in small alleys. They get more and more persons involved because already the people in the area are prepared. They know there is going to be something on January 25th based on the work of these activist groups that volunteered. And they would start from there. They will go, as they grow in numbers, to little bigger streets, little bigger streets. They just go up and down in neighborhoods until their numbers seem to grow enough so that by 4 o'clock or something, everybody heads to the central point in every city that we need to occupy. In the case of Cairo, everybody had heard the name of that central point, which is Tahrir Square or Liberation Square. That was not only in Cairo. I have been traveling in the area between Cairo up to the north to the Mediterranean and to the east to the Suez Canal. If we try to verify where did the Egyptian revolution start on January 25th, this is where it started, in this one geographical area, which contradicts with the public story that this was internet organization. On the internet, there was no mention of anything in organizing that we actually did. There were not all these rallies that have been organized, nothing. It was the actual work on the ground. And as I said before, most Egyptians have no access to internet anyway. So I traveled in all these places. There was one city that had a different plan, which is the city of Mahalla, because this city was already in rebellion before and was under kind of occupation. So it didn't have any protest since that rebellion that took place 3 years before the revolution. And the plan was to awaken the city by making a protest. So on Friday, January 21st, a few days before January 25th, I went there with a bunch of activists, and I met other activists who came from other cities from the Delta. And we organized the first protest in this city since that rebellion. But we organized it in a way that doesn't allow the police to arrest us. How? By standing up on like a little stone island with, plants in the middle of a big road. So we would stand separately with maybe a few yards in between each one of us with the signs in a long way so that we cannot be arrested for unlawful assembly. And so they will have to spend time to talk to their superiors what to do about this new form of protest that they haven't dealt with before in this city. We did it until I felt that there is possible reaction, that they may have gotten some orders when they started moving their troops around, and then we called it off. But it gave the message. And this city didn't even require any of these tactics to start. It just broke out everywhere in that city by everybody on the day. The reason why I chose this city for this particular thing was, in its previous rebellion, they had to utilize the police force of 5 different other governorates. You know, with the Dakota pipeline and how many police departments they have had to take to face the activists there. It was something similar, but on even larger scale. So they took all these police force from all these places in order to combat the rebellion of this city, which was non-violent even. And I thought that if we can make this city start again a similar rebellion, this will give a chance for the other cities for a plan like the one that I am proposing to work, because I wasn't sure this can work. All the people I have been meeting were first-timers with no experience. And I didn't know if they would follow the instructions. I didn't know if they will continue together until the end. I didn't know. I was just doing like one group after another in one city and a different city and traveling and this and that. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't sure January 25th is going to be the beginning of the actual revolution. All my efforts were to try to save the day to be a day of success and hope for the people, and that it will not be another failure, so that we could still launch a revolution in that year, in 2011. The day before January 24th, 24 hours until it's time. There was nothing to do. You can't train anybody to do anything. Even if you do, like, they have no time to prepare any area to do anything. That's it. And I was on fire. I couldn't sleep the night until almost early morning, and then I fell asleep. To wake up about 11 was the first phone call from some distant city in the Delta that I don't even remember. Some guy speaking with a lot of enthusiasm and with all these, big sounds around, like of masses. We are free, we're free, we defeated the police, our city is free. And wow, okay, that early? Oh my God. And as I was trying to wake up and put on some clothes, which took me about an hour because I had to answer all these other phone calls, I was hearing about formations of large protests in various areas in Cairo and Alexandria, in the different cities, about clashes in certain areas, all that stuff. So I left the house not even knowing where to go because I didn't organize a single protest myself. I only trained those who would. And I was thinking about all the protests that they told me about. Okay, which one is nearer that I should head to? But then I heard all this noise and I realized there was a huge one just near my house, in which I joined, and then I led. And we arrived to Tahrir a little after 4 o'clock. There was maybe one or two more groups that arrived before us. So Tahrir was still in clashes. So those masses, they came in and they started throwing stones and pushing the police. The police was throwing stones and tear gas and, of course, using batons and so on. The ultras were the soccer fans. And in Egypt, there are two different camps for soccer, like Democrats and Republicans here, but not in politics in soccer. So you have the supporters of Ahli and the supporters of Zamalek who are in bitter animosity to each other. We tried to get them into activism before that. Actually, I hosted one of their leaders in my house for a few months, hoping that we can convince them into activism. They wouldn't. But because the police kept trying to control them, they grew very upset with what the police has been doing. So there was a little trick that actually worked really well with them, which was to send envoys to each of the two camps through their leaders that I knew, that the other guys are going to protest on January 25th, and they are going to beat the shit out of the cops, and you will be staying at home watching it on television, if you want. Or you can come out and show your real, whatever. So it worked. Both sides got a little jealous. They decided to go in rallies. And surprisingly, on that day, they joined those rallies together because I didn't know about one rule they had, that they're supposed to be against each other in everything, except if they're facing cops. If they're facing cops, if they're facing the police. And they were the ones that allowed us to take Tahrir, because they are all sports fans, they are all strong. They were the only ones who could face the actual large numbers of troops that were coming in to break us. The battle, we got the police out of Tahrir, but the battle was continuing on the edge as they were trying to come in again with massive forces. Then they stopped at 6 o'clock. There was a ceasefire or so. Only until midnight when they attacked massively. I led a group to get out of really it was very difficult with the tear gas and everything. And we rallied back to my neighborhood where I was arrested. There was a warrant for my arrest, and I was accused of being the mastermind of the conspiracy to overthrow the regime, of course. There was an arrest order for me earlier. I was really roughed up. They smashed my nose, and it was stuck up there with all blood, and I had some other injuries. I was really stunned from the beating at the beginning. And then we were taken to a police station and then to a kind of a concentration camp, makeshift of concentration camp. There was this central security. It's a branch of the police that is used against protesters. Central security camp. So they put us in a ward, 300 people in a ward that should take, I don't know, like 30. And so they removed the beds from the wall. Like you could see there were bunker beds, a place for bunker beds on the walls, but they have been removed. And there is nothing, no access to toilets. So the people had to use one part for like toilet and everybody crowds on the other part. I didn't eat anything during my stay there of the horrible food that they presented because I didn't want to participate in this horrible situation, of course. Finally, I was taken to a courthouse where I was being interrogated officially, not by state security officers, but by a prosecutor. And of course, I denied all charges, as we always do. And I was faced with evidence against my charges, etc. So they took me down to my cell. And then another day passed, and there was something weird going on. We hear soldiers going up and down in to the dungeons area where we were underground. And then finally they came down, they opened all the cells, they put us in 3 lines. Each line put us in a prison truck, and prison truck would go in direction, and then they threw us out separately in various parts. I didn't know what was going on, but it was the police chain command broke on January 28th because of the massive protests everywhere that overwhelmed all police that we spoke about, all those millions of police, so you know what that is. And they got defeated. So it was it. That was it. They couldn't do anything. They had to escape. The police was in hiding. The police officers were hiding for that period. And I had to walk home without knowing what's going on, without knowing the direction of home, with my face smashed and all that. I had 2 surgeries here in America just to help me breathe, but still having problems with breathing. And I went to a hospital. I managed to walk to a hospital, avoiding. I saw military in like the main streets, so I had to avoid the military, go in back streets. And it was a long, hard night. I got to a hospital. They fixed my nose, but they had no anesthesia. So they did it without anesthesia. I had to get someone to hold my head, and like someone breaks the nose and puts it together. It was really horrible. I went home finally, and I really, literally crashed on the floor. I just fell. I just couldn't. I woke up in the morning, early morning, and I decided to clean myself to shower. So I showered, trying not to get water on my nose. And I changed, and I thought I will have to go to Tahrir. I have to figure out what's going on. Because I tried to use internet, and there was no internet. I didn't know that Mubarak stupidly cut off the internet, which was really great because it finally made the bridge between the keyboard activists that never join us in any of our events. Only on Facebook they show themselves. To actually coming out to do things because they were cut off and they got curious, like, what the hell is going on? You got to go out and see, you know. So that was very good for us. It was not as smart on Mubarak's side. Anyway, I went to the square, and there was blood, fires. The stench of the tear gas from the battle of the night before was still very, very strong. And then we heard noises that there is a street where snipers are still shooting activists, and we have to run to get them out. So I ran with the people who ran, because people actually were running toward danger, not from danger in this revolution. And as soon as if, you know, this is a building, this is a street, so I'm like in a blind spot here because this is the building, you know. Once I stepped into the street, it was like a war zone for real, like fires all around me. And then someone who was on my right got his head blown up, literally. I've never seen this before, so I was in shock. And then I got hit with a bullet in my head, which was very lucky because it's lodged here. It came with an angle, so it could have gone through my eye and killed me. It could have at least like chopped my ear off if it was like, I don't know. I mean, if it was more vertical, it would have definitely crushed my skull. But it was a heavy blow. So of course it knocked me down. And I was in a very uncomfortable position on the floor, of course, disoriented. And not sure what's going on. And then I'm feeling liquid, it's blood. And then I am hearing sounds that were strange around me, doing like this. I was wondering what would make a sound like this around me until I started seeing the dust. Each time the sound comes, it was bullets hitting the asphalt around me. There was a sniper that was playing cat and mouse, like in your Western movies, you know, when they do the gun thing. I was on the ground and somebody was shooting around. So of course I had this very visible look because I had, as you could see, you know, my face was bandaged. And, I don't know if you can see it clearly here, but yeah, my face was bandaged because of the injury of my nose. So I was a very visible kind of target, and I was in a very uncomfortable position and very stunned. So I didn't know what to do. I can't even move. And okay, once I start moving, I'll get killed. If I wait a little, I don't know, maybe he will kill me, maybe he will not, I don't know. Somebody grabbed me very quickly and like pulled me back into the blind spot for the sniper. So I heard bullets hitting the asphalt, but I was not. I was lucky. I was really lucky. So we started the sit-in Tahrir. Tahrir was a piece of utopia. It was the perfect place during this time. Everyone who was there, they were prepared to die for what they believe in. Not as terrorists, as peaceful people who are seeking freedom for everyone. So you will have people of all different levels of society, of all different ages, of all different economical backgrounds. And everyone is doing everything within their powers to help everybody else. We would leave our cell phones at places to get charged, and then we go back and get them. No fear about losing anything. If you drop something, you know you will go to the lost and found and get it. And I'm not talking here about a sit-in of a few hundred people or a few thousand people. I'm talking about even millions at times. We would have check-ins on all the entrances where if you are coming in, you have to have an ID card and you have to possess absolutely nothing that can be used as a weapon. People are searched, their bags are searched, they have to show their ID before they come in. And we have been stopping people from coming in if they don't show this. Because we didn't need more people. We don't want troublemakers. We just wanted the real ones. This had been the case until about the last 3 or 4 days. By that time, it seemed more clear that Mubarak's days are over. And then more curious persons started to come in. Thieves, maybe. So we started getting things stolen. Some women complained about getting groped. And things like that. And that was the change within what happened with those sit-in days. Anyway, we ousted Mubarak. Everybody knows this. Wonderful. I went to DC straight after. Oh, I forgot. I have been playing a role parallel to everything that I have been doing, which was to represent the Egyptian opposition in dealing with some of the world's governments, including the US government. So I have been dealing with 2 administrations the George W. Bush administration and the Obama administration. I have met with both, and I have negotiated with Hillary Clinton about Egypt and about Libya. I was the first person to represent the Libyan rebels, leading to the Security Council resolution on Libya. As I worked it out was Mike Posner, the Assistant Secretary of State. So I went to Washington, D.C. A couple of weeks after we ousted Mubarak, as soon as I could get there. I was received as a big hero. So everywhere I went, it was really awesome. The White House, State Department, Pentagon, Congress, of course. I actually gave a speech in the Congress in May 2009, a couple of years before the revolution. As I said, I've been quite active with this. I came to the United States a dozen times before the revolution in trying to promote democracy. So why would I do this? It's very simple. The United States is the country that has the biggest, unfortunately, influence in what's happening in Egypt. Whether I like it or I don't, that doesn't change that fact. The US support to the dictatorships in Egypt had been the main factor that protected those dictatorships from the change that people wish. So if I want to create a change inside Egypt, I have to deal with this problem. I cannot ignore it. And how can you deal with this? By direct dialogue. What do you want, and what do we want, and how we can work the best for everyone. So I've been trying to explain and show that an actual democracy in Egypt will be for the best interest of everyone, because it brings peace, it brings education, it brings openness, it brings lots of things that we need, and there are plans that I have proposed in order to achieve this. So when I came to the United States after we ousted Mubarak in February, I did come with a plan for change. If this plan would have been followed, the situation in Egypt wouldn't be like this. It would have been a democracy. You wouldn't have seen ISIL starting, because people wouldn't have lost their faith in nonviolence. There would have been more democracies in that region and far less blood in Yemen and in Libya and in all these places. We can analyze the reasons of the blood shed, as I would love, of course, to speak about this if anyone is interested. So what happened was I had all these very positive reactions. For example, one of the many meetings I had at the State Department was deliberately organized in the Marshall Room. And if we remember World War II and the rebuilding of Germany, it was the Marshall Plan that was for that particular purpose, in order to rebuild Germany and integrate it after World War II. So they made it in such manner to show that they are willing to, that this is what we're talking about now, the next phase. My plans that I have presented, which were based on our demands and our program in the revolution, as it has been put in all these big banners that have been photographed 100 million times. First, we need to deal with the military. So our proposition is that we would like to have a presidential council, an interim presidential council, and an interim technocratic government to run business in Egypt for a transitional period of 2 years. Why? Because people, when they are brainwashed for so long, they need first to know what's what, who is saying what. They have to hear the different points of view, the different ideas, the different things. They need time for that, especially if the country is very poor and if most people can't use internet. So how do we do this? Well, the military in Egypt, they get their support and their legitimacy from the United States. For instance, in one of my few visits to the Pentagon, which is huge, of course, as you know. I was standing, in stool to pee in the restroom, and a man who came to pee next to me was wearing the Egyptian general uniform. So of course I recognized the uniform, but he didn't recognize I was Egyptian. I could have been anybody, so I didn't talk to him. But then afterwards, when I was talking to the people at the Pentagon, I was asking like, hey, I just saw an Egyptian general here. And they told me, yeah, they're here all the time. So this is what I'm talking about. Okay. So my proposition was, okay, how about if we start working on public, positive conditionality to the US aid in Egypt, in which would be in favor of the younger officers so that you get their support. And as it is a conditionality, it is conditioned with the progress on transition, as we are proposing with our plan. So I was proposing positive conditionality to the US aid. And behind closed doors, pressure over the generals that if they don't abandon power, things will be rough for them. And if they accept to do so, they can do this with the protection of the United States, so they can take all their loots or the money they have stolen, and they enjoy the rest of their lives and their grandchildren's lives forever, so wherever they want to be. Just leave our country. So we save lives and we rebuild it. That was a solution about how do we get into the transition. Now, the second part of this plan, what are we going to do with the transition? How can we fund it? So, Egypt is a very wealthy country, as a matter of fact. But it's been robbed, it's always sucked out. And there is this huge gap between the people and the few kleptocratic class on the top. Under Mubarak, it was not always like this. They are all newly rich under Mubarak. They got their fortunes under Mubarak. Okay. These people, they have been doing all sorts of illegal things, like bringing, fertilizers and pesticides that are carcinogenic or whatever you call it, that are banned in the world, and they get commission. They stole, of course, most of the assets. They have been dealing with ancient Egyptian artifacts that are extremely lucrative, like billions even of dollars could be the value of the contents of some of these tombs. And they have been dealing with this. So there has been estimates that there is over $3 trillion worth of Egyptian assets that had been smuggled out or possessed abroad within the 30 years of the Mubarak rule. So, of course, as we all know, the NSA, they have access to all our information. They pay special attention to wires of money and big money moving around, because it could be used for terrorism, it could be used for buying weapons. So the US actually has information about all these transactions, about all these properties. We even know about many of these properties. Big estates and big, properties and whatever all around, and even bank accounts in some banks that we figured out, and all this. So if we could, with your help, retrieve just even 10% of our assets, this will be massively enabling us to prepare Egypt within this transition into what it should be. I'm sorry? Okay. Yeah, into what we propose it to be. And then what happens afterwards, after the transition itself? We want to have a democracy. So when there is a government in Egypt that is elected 2 years later, the third phase of my plans that had been proposed was, let's make something that I propose to call temporarily the Friends of Egypt Club or Forum, which should have in its membership private sector as well as governments, in order to take certain parts in Egypt to make them free zones for trade and for industry. Why? Because Egypt is extremely central. It's, of course, we have the Suez Canal, the Mediterranean, the Red Sea. We have all those markets around. We have a huge population, so we have a lot of manpower. We have a lot of raw material, like everything. And if you look at Hamburg, for example, which I've been to, one of the biggest, most stunning ports of the world, it's up there in the north of Europe, out of everyone's way. And if you look at Dubai, that I've been to, a piece of next century, and it's like also kind of out of everyone's way. It's not as central as Egypt. That's what I mean. So there are more prospects of definitely profit within ideas like this. So everybody liked those ideas. I came back from this visit, maybe we have hope. Things are promising. No. In March, next month, the military did something I warned about. They made a referendum in collaboration with the Islamists to promote certain ideas and to show support for them by telling the ignorant population that if they say yes to Islam. If they say no to Islam. Just as simple as this, without anybody knowing what the hell is in the referendum. So, of course, it had 72% saying yes to whatever that is that nobody really understood. And the next month, April, the United States decided to work on ignoring us, forging a deal between the Islamists and the military to share power, which succeeded in bringing Morsi, an Islamist dictator, into power. We had to organize and redo everything until we brought him down. And then this was followed by a promising situation where the head of the Constitutional Court, as we had demanded, became an interim president, and Dr. Mohammed al-Baradei, the Nobel Award winner that I mentioned before, became the vice president. So wonderful, we are getting somewhere now, but then the military jumped in. So Sisi started with massacring 4,000 people that were taking part in a protest in support of the Muslim Brotherhood. I disagree with the Muslim Brotherhood, but I cannot condone the killing of anyone, especially they were peaceful protesters. They were not armed. They were massacred by helicopter, machine guns and all sorts of terrible things. And it's documented with Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and all this. So Dr. al-Baradei, when he found this, he resigned. He left the country. And that was it. Sisi took over. He promoted himself to field marshal, like any small-minded dictator. And he got himself elected, of course, with a huge majority that has been fabricated, and that's it. So this is the situation in Egypt. Now, what is the problem? What does this bring us? The situation in Egypt, as I mentioned earlier, has extreme human rights violations, where the population is exploding. The regime doesn't have full control over the country, and they bomb various places, the various ports. A few months ago, there were in the news, maybe somebody can check this whenever they remember, there was a group of Mexican tourists in Egypt that were bombed by the Egyptian Air Force twice. And this made it to the news here because they were not Egyptian. But actually, the air raids happen in Egypt every day in various parts. Scores of people get killed, and nobody hears about it because this regime doesn't care about anything. That's why when Donald Trump called him and told him to withdraw the proposal that presumably Egypt had presented in the Security Council resolution, he obeyed because he knows his house is made of glass. If he doesn't obey, he will get the wrath of the strong guy here. But instead, he wants to be, how do you say, like a favorable slave, as these gangster-style personalities are with their patriarchal hierarchies. So the situation in Egypt is developing into becoming something like Syria, something like Iraq. And there is a big difference, though. With Syria, the population is 23 million people. Population in Egypt is over 90 million. And Egypt is the most central country that traditionally is the core of stability in the Middle East. Once Egypt breaks apart, say goodbye to the Middle East. It's going to be in hell, which means the rest of the world will be the same, which means more blood and more violence, more destruction, more everything. How do we stop this? Simply by understanding what does every human being needs. Every human being needs to be safe, of course. Needs to have their rights of clean food, a place to exist, clean air, whatever, just the basics. People in those parts of the world are denied of all that. They are denied of everything because they live under corrupt regimes that pollute everything, makes it completely toxic in their countries. They have no money because all the money and the economy is stolen and put in the hands of the few corrupt on the top. There is no real education anymore. There is no real health care anymore. And there is always deterioration. Meanwhile, there is a promotion from both the West and particular forces in the Middle East for extremism. Islamism over there and this very conservative Islamophobic thing here and in the West. So to understand this, we have to understand that a Muslim doesn't mean an Islamist. We Muslims are the target of Islamists. What are Islamists? An Islamist is someone, as we call in Arabic, which is actually more accurate, muta'aslim, someone who pretends to be a Muslim. This is what we call them. They are the pretenders. They are utilizing the name of Islam while doing everything that is against Islam. You cannot tell me you're a Muslim if you lie. I mean, if that you are an Islamic, that you are a strict Muslim if you lie, if you cheat, if you think it's okay to hurt someone else. These are forbidden. Islam, the Quran, the actual Quran, not what they claim. Sometimes on the news they claim stuff that is supposed to be in the Quran. They say it's in the Quran, but it isn't. The Quran says the killing of one soul for God is like the killing of all humanity. The saving of one soul is like the saving of all humanity. That human life is sacred. And always to treat people kindly, to be always gentle, even if they are bad to you. Well, like exactly turning the other cheek and all that stuff. It's the same. So why do we have this? First of all, there is a base for the ideology, the extremist ideology, that had developed into this cult. Those bases are in Saudi Arabia, which was never called Saudi because this is Arabia. Then, 19th century, early 19th century, there was a rebellion or a movement that was made by someone called Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and Muhammad al-Saud. They started from a city called Al-Dir'a in the east of Arabia with a very fanatic and very narrow-minded ideology, and they started invading and attacking and killing Muslims in various places. The people in Arabia, they were in horror, so they actually sent messages all over to call for help. At this time, the king of Egypt was Muhammad Ali, who sent the Egyptian army and defeated the Wahhabis, because, of course, this is the name of the movement, Wahhabism, and drove them out of most of Arabia. It brought them back to their small enclave in Al-Dir'a. But then, Egypt was defeated by the European nations when Egypt was trying to invade the Ottoman Empire. So Egypt managed to invade most of the Ottoman Empire, and halfway through Turkey, the European nations united, they destroyed the Egyptian fleet, and there were negotiations that brought the Egyptian properties back into only Africa, like until Uganda, so the Nile Valley, and the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. And then this had brought us to the return of the Wahhabis, because the Ottomans were too weak to have control over the Holy Lands. These guys, they were strong and ignorant, so they took over. They raped the women in Al-Medina and Mecca, the holiest places. So nobody tells me these guys are good. Then there is oil. And then the United States intervened, wanting to get the oil from Arabia, so became friends with the Saudis. Friendship that had been going on and on and on. So with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the CIA decided, okay, now if we are going to train and deal with those guys in Afghanistan to go against the Soviets, why don't we use the religion element? Because the invaders are communists. This would be a good start. Who are the most fanatic and who can fund this? The Saudis. So Saudi money, Saudi schools were established in Pakistan among the refugees from Afghanistan, training them, giving them the Wahhabi ideology. This continued into what we hear now as Taliban. Taliban means the students. They were the students of these schools. And they managed to defeat, bring down the Soviets, and now it is being used in order to keep the fear, in order to maintain weapons industry, in order to find excuse to take over resources, to exploit resources in other countries. Who would find something like this very interesting and lucrative, because ethically they don't really care? Of course, the new administration, from what we see. And they are promoting the idea of confrontationalism, of divisionism. They are trying to use a cult that had appeared within Islam, that is only followed by a fraction, that had been supported by a powerful entity that is supported by the United States, that is Saudi Arabia, that had links with the US security apparatuses. They are using those assholes in order to brand the quarter of the population of the world, the Muslims, of these very evil things. And this would lead to more confrontationalism, as I said, and division. And I warn that this is not for the best interest of humanity in any way, of course. We need to spread facts and to understand within every group of people, there are those who are kind, who are loving, who are giving, those who are selfish, narrow-minded, or even aggressive. There are always the rapists and the saints in every culture. But when it comes to the religion of Islam, it does not condone, it does not promote any kind of violence. This is what I read in the Quran, this is what I understand in that thing. So now let's move to finally one last step, which is Trump. So Donald Trump, a very controversial person, obviously, seems to have had always a certain fascination toward dictators and tyrants, as we can see in various things. But particularly in the case of Egypt, it's so scary with everything that I warned about. The first person he called after he got elected was Sisi. Second was Benjamin Netanyahu. Sisi of Egypt. Why? And then after that proposal that I mentioned, he spoke about Sisi, and he spoke about how much of a great man he is. This means that possibly this new administration, if we don't ward, if we don't put this, I don't know, out somehow, this means that there is going to be a chain reaction in the Middle East that would be very destructive, that millions of people are going to suffer, probably hundreds of thousands or even millions would die, that no one will be safe. Because one of the other reasons that are very important that produce terrorism is not only the bad ideology of a cult, but it is injustices. When you are at your home and then somebody bombs your home, and for example, you're the only survivor, you lost all your family, you lost everything, and then you look around, you lost your home, you lost your country, and you're out there trying to figure out a place to survive, and then somebody tells you, why don't we get back at those who had attacked us? And this is where it starts. From injustices that can be justified, like the reaction would be justified by a sort of screwed up cult that would allow it. And we can see this in various cultures, in various places. For example, I do meditation with Buddhists. I love Buddhism. One of my favorite books is the Dhammapada. But there are Buddhists who actually have been even doing suicide bombings. The first people doing suicide bombings were Buddhists in Sri Lanka. There are Buddhists in, what was it, Myanmar, Burma, that are massacring the Muslim minority over there and raping them. And it's proven, it's all over, like the Rohingya people, and it's awful. They are doing all sorts of terrible things. Why? Is this because Buddhism says that? Of course not. Were the Crusaders that were massacring everybody that they see, even before they ask what is their religion, if they were Muslims or Christians or Jews in the Middle East, were they doing this based on Christianity? Of course not. That's why the Arabs didn't call them Crusaders. They didn't call them Christians. They called them the Franks. Al-Frinja, that was the Arab word. And the Arabs, Muslims and Christians were fighting the Al-Frinja, the Franks, in attempt to protect their homeland. Okay, I have been like branching out a lot because there is a lot to talk about, but getting into our story here to end this. This book, actually, I spent about 3 years on and off doing it because I wanted it to come out in the most useful way that I could within my abilities, within my limited abilities. And I wanted it to be very verified. So it has all these references that prove what we are talking about. So everything can be documented, can be verified, can be checked. I am hoping that with this, we are explaining for real things that are very important, such as why the real story is not out. Because, okay, I have certain suspicions. I might be paranoid. But when we started the revolution and the news that it was internet revolution started to come out, I was in touch with the US Embassy. So in a meeting that I had back then with, what's his name, Peter Shea, who was the head of the political office, I asked him, what the hell is this stuff being said in the media about this being internet? You know what's going on. You know that this was my plans and execution. And he said, oh, of course, we know everything, but we have no control over the media. And I'm sure the real story will come out. Okay, of course it never did, like in that manner. But when I went to Morocco to help train some activists, it was shocking to them that our revolution was not internet revolution, because this is what they knew. And I tried to give them tactics and things. We made a big protest the next day in front of the parliament in Rabat. And then I was getting out of the country. I got arrested on the way, and I got blacklisted from ever going to Morocco. But anyway, this is the point. When activists don't have the real tools, they resort to the wrong tools and then they fail. So as long as we don't know the real tactics that actually work, that actually bring people out, we will make one small mistake here, one small mistake there, and it's not working. But we keep trying and it's not working. So we need to make these things clear. Also, we need to clarify what's going on in Egypt for all of us, our safety as humanity, our well-being in this world, because this is leading to something that is going to be very devastating, especially with the current changes in the US politics. While I was in Egypt, before that, I had to cut my relations with my relatives, with my friends, with everybody, because I could get arrested, I could get killed. Anybody that I know could be dragged into this. So it was always very dangerous for everyone. And to be totally honest, this is part of the dilemma that I am in now, because I have PTSD from my torture, and I have some problems because of this. Like, my communication with people had been only limited to organizing for several years, because I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't be involved with anybody in any other manner. No more friends, no more going out doing, So it's becoming difficult for me to reinitialize this and to start getting again to be with people in normal circumstances. And I am being treated from the PTSD and the survivor's guilt and all these things. But it's an ongoing journey, and it's, I wouldn't lie, it's tough to be here, but I am grateful I'm alive. Very good question. Actually, this was a very delicate matter that I was treading with calculations sometimes and taking calculated risks. So first of all, I have been, I've been wearing several hats. So publicly in Egypt, I was not affiliated with any more protest movement after I got out of prison. I was secretly the brains behind April 6th until I was losing control gradually, as I mentioned earlier. Publicly, I was a reporter. So I was going all over, having a high profile, meeting all these officials, doing things on that manner. And then my trips to the West, to the United States, were not, I would always be very careful on the content of anything that I have that shows what I was doing, because they have put me on a watch list so that I am searched thoroughly and interrogated when I am leaving the country and when I'm entering the country each time. And so I would always have a cover story. Sometimes they do get information, but sometimes they don't. And then when I testified in the Congress, in that session, the head of the Human Rights Committee, or I don't remember the exact name, it's Human Rights something in the Congress, Tom Lantos, Human Rights Committee, yeah. He said in that session, which was very public with representatives from the Egyptian embassy, if anything happens to Mr. Ahmed Salah after he returns to Egypt, the Congress of the United States will not remain silent. So it was a strong warning. And I left with a letter from Frank Wolf, who was another member of Congress from Virginia, a Republican actually, who's very active in these issues, that was strong in saying that they are protecting me, and that my rights in speaking freely have to be, preserved, and I don't know what. But so as I was returning to Egypt, I will not lie, on the plane itself, after I took the flight, I started feeling gradually like my heart is going down, 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 down to my feet. I was I'm being led to my execution. But then once it landed, I had this shift that was very strange. I became very cheerful, laughing with everybody. And then they immediately recognized me, as always, and they took me aside. But that was the first time ever, the only time, I was not thoroughly searched or interrogated. They did pick me up immediately, as usual, and they took me aside, but they took me to go. So that even gave me a little protection. They had someone tailing me in person, like very physically visible, for a few days, but then that disappeared and they maintained just electronic surveillance. During also this period, for example, they had put a spy on me that I recruited. So I have been giving this spy what I want the police to find out. This was all, it's a complex thing. So in many occasions, they didn't have a clear idea exactly what I'm doing. They know I'm doing stuff and I'm well connected. How far, how bad, if they get to me, this, that, they weren't sure. So that gave me a little protection when I became visible. Before that, of course, I was almost killed in prison. And what saved me was actually that I was the head of the only youth movement in the country. I was well known to reporters, and many people started asking questions about where the hell is this guy? What happened to him? So after I was sent to that prison cell, after I ended my hunger strike and so on, they actually released me a month later. So these were circumstances that were like, you take risks that you have maybe 50-50 chance of success, and then if you succeed, you take another step with another risk and back and forth, things like that. There was a certain attempt of contact, not on my part. Someone contacted me and had a couple of meetings with me, presenting himself as from State Department. But I didn't like what I heard being demanded, that they... No, it's just yeah, within, okay, of course, as you know, within the administration, there are the appointees, but there are the career, persons. So this was obviously a career person there. If he was from the State Department, I know that CIA people also present themselves as State Department and all that. So I don't know. Yeah, but I didn't appreciate a request that was that I should give names of my contacts before we initiate this kind of dialogue, because of course I would not give a name of anyone. They are bugging my phones and stuff. They can do what they want, but I'm not giving anything voluntarily. Now, if they are no longer in power, they know they cannot get in power again. And this is the story with Hosni Mubarak, for example. Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, he is still free, wealthy, happy, safe in Egypt under the general's rule, providing he doesn't try to take the throne from Sisi. So he accepted that, and he's setting aside. So in return, he is having whatever he wants. Because he knows he cannot take over power, even with all the money he has, if Sisi has the military. These things are complex, and there is never an easy solution. What we can do is we try to understand that they are very complex, and we try to tackle some of the main problems in order to make things more possible for a solution. Once I was in the Pentagon, and they were telling me about something. They were telling me that they invited me into this session that had nothing to do with what I was doing, but just because I was there and it was happening. So in this session, there was a committee that was presenting like their findings. And that included polls that had been made through the US Army and I don't know what organizations that does professional polling in several Muslim countries, with a series of questions to see the amount of support to the terrorism exactly in these countries and to the ideology that leads to that. And interestingly, of course, there were various percentages between 80 to 90 something in different countries of people who had been saying fully that any violence against any person is haram, it's forbidden in Islam. And then they would give proofs from the religion. But then you will have another smaller percentage that could be up to, I don't know, 15% in Pakistan or something, and I don't know, 7%. It varies, of course, in one country to another, and they would say things that are more fanatic, like, no, they are that, and then when they are asked in the follow-up question, okay, what is your justification to this? And instead of putting religious texts that would justify what they are saying, presumably, they put political things, like the attack on this, the massacre of that, the invasion of this, the occupation of that. These would be the excuses. So at the end, the discussion was, first, that there is a huge problem of illiteracy in most of the Muslim world, because most of it is plagued with dictators that have an interest in keeping the population ignorant. In the case of Egypt, half of the population is illiterate. That's one thing. The other thing is the Quran is written in a language that was 1400 years ago. It's not the language people speak. You have to be well educated to understand. Number three, with the current, all these hatreds and invasions and I don't know what, and social media and international media, there are people who are trying to make the world in camps, like really polarize everybody. Like, this is our side, this is your side, and this allows this kind of rhetoric in the media that pushes subconsciously into this, could allow some persons to have such sentiments. An interesting thing that I have seen on television here, even on CNN, when they talk about Islam, that they would say things that they say are from the Quran, but they are not from the Quran. They would be from books that came 300 years later, for example, like some hadith books, in which are not accepted by Muslims as a fact. They are accepted as reference, because nobody knows. These were things that in Islam as a religion, there is only one book that Muslims say or believe is a message that came from God. And they believe everything else that followed is made by man. Muslims also, but they are trying to teach and to explain. Many of these books are very wonderful, are very open, and many others are narrow-minded, are, shitty in some sort, or whatever. The Wahhabis, they have decided to base their ideology on this kind of narrow-mindedness. They have a lot of money, and they make schools, and they make these programs that try to teach their understanding, their Wahhabi understanding of Islam. And this Wahhabi understanding is the basis for the cult that can get into this kind of extremism of accepting the killing of masses. And under what logic would someone who blows himself inside a mosque killing Muslims who are praying be considered a Muslim? I mean, and these things are happening there because of this ruined ideology that is based on ignorance. One of the criteria that you can check about ISIL in their recruitment, one of the conditions is that they want to choose people who don't know about Islam. Because if they knew, they would argue. They would say, this is not it. And then they can be indoctrinated and, programmed. So there is this factor when it comes to ISIL. If we talk about ISIL, there is this factor. There are two other factors. One, as I said, is people who have been hurt a lot by whatever. Like in Iraq, for example, the Sunnis were first attacked by the Americans and now subjected to horrible situation by the Shiite government that is supported by Iran. So many of the officers of Saddam Hussein, they decided to join ISIL for political reason. In the case of Syria, we all know Assad, how brutal he is and what he does. He's killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians. His father was doing the same thing, but before the age of internet. And away from all these injustices, there is one other thing, that is when ISIL takes a territory, it is the one in control. So what can you do? Maybe you have no more job because you can't do your job. Maybe because they ban it. They ban cigarettes, for example. They ban lots of things. They cut the tongue of people who call them Daesh, by the way. That's why we call them Daesh, which means a stupid guy who doesn't know where he's going. So this is what the name we give to them is Daesh, not ISIS. ISIS is an Egyptian goddess. The translation of the name they give to themselves is ISIL, so I'm using it. So this is it, yeah.